Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Ivan Engel, and hopefully this will be the first installment in a series of videos I intend to make for the glory of God and the education of others on the topics of political philosophy, the history of thought, and Eastern Orthodox Christianity. The Western world is undergoing a crisis of identity and seems on the path of self-destruction. People are confused about who they are and why they should even associate with each other. Western individualism has bred a very antisocial and fragmented consumerist society, held together by sheer force and alienating us from each other. Thankfully, a rebirth is possible. Who are we? Where does our identity come from? Depending on your cosmology and your worldview, you'll have a metaphysics and an anthropology that answers that question. But unfortunately for the West, identity does not come from individualism. Individualism arises from a set of beliefs that come to full maturity during the European Enlightenment and after the Protestant Reformation. We start seeing notions of man separated and abstracted from nature in thinkers like Rousseau. And this crude idea that man can somehow be thought of apart from culture, from society, and from his personal relationships, this counterfactual man in a state of pure nature, not only does not exist, but performatively alienates man from any sort of tradition. Anthropological developments such as these led to a society of shifting loyalties, in which nobody truly belongs anywhere nor with anyone, in which history is irrelevant, and we're all deracinated in a cosmopolitanism that rules us. It is only possible under a free-thinking anthropology that developed in a Western liberal culture. I believe ideas, traditions, and politics matter. The history of thought matters because it testifies to the development of how we see ourselves. The decadent culture that we have now is antagonistic towards any real lived tradition with personal authority and based in personal relationships. It is a direct descendant of these empty rationalistic, humanistic, and counterfactual ideals. What we're told is science is simply bad philosophy, shaping how we're supposed to see the world and affecting our culture, our politics, and our lives. We have been smuggling the wrong presuppositions and trying to make the world fit our lunacy. So now we find ourselves in a mad world. Since modernity, we live un, under a rule that pretends to be partial, which tries to purify the world of irrationality. It simply tucks it away while serving the worst of our irrational impulses. Most people don't want to see it because it's very uncomfortable, because it's intellectually complex and time consuming. And it's true, it is difficult to think about these things, to question the concepts that were ingrained in us in our youth as sacrosanct. But we must. And there is no other way to recover what was once ours, our true legacy and identity, our very image of ourselves. We face a perennial tendency towards selfishness, but some moments in time are better and some are worse. The development of a secular humanism can be tracked historically in this regard. In the Renaissance, there's already a turn away from Christian tradition in an attempt to recover a long lost tradition of pagan antiquity. We start seeing the artist as a revolutionary who breaks away from current tradition and heroically brings back something old in a new guise. We see him as an innovator who is to be praised for his incredible one of a kind contribution. The grandiosity of the genius artist which now lives on as celebrity culture. We get Michelangelo signing his work to point to himself as the source of his artwork, a variant of the idea of the self made man, of man as divine in himself. These Gnostic humanistic ideals of man declaring himself as the measure of all things make identity fluid and malleable because they promise people that they can somehow redefine their own identity through the prism of themselves without needing any actual connection to what they idealize or even to external reality. The ancient tradition can be simply distorted and repackaged to fit the current sensibilities or agendas, so nothing is sacred but what we whimsically choose to make sacred. It is pure power, power for power's sake. This revolutionary mode of being relativizes tradition and identity because it means you can reinterpret tradition as you see fit without a concrete connection to a living tradition transmitted through other people. It makes society value novelty over the tried and true. fantastical concepts over reality, and personal desire over any authority. It's nothing but a turn inwards towards narcissism, towards man idealizing himself and separating himself from others in order to protect his self image in an ever enclosing self referential loop. This cultural trend has been consolidated and normalized by simply spreading bad anthropology. Like, for example, the idea that humans are able to use logic and reason to construct their whole worldviews. These Enlightenment ideas are not only a lie, but become tools of oppression. They do not even account for the fact that two different people with different values and traditions will see from the same account different perspectives. So there is no way to account for those differences in interpretation because they rely on traditions and worldviews which precede rational propositions. So, what is a tradition? Traditions are the unwritten rules that govern our hearts and how we deal with each other, echoing through time. Your tradition is literally your connection to other people, living in other people. Because human beings live in history and we are not walled off individuals, but rather we interpenetrate each other, connecting all of us as persons to the rest of humanity. These are the deepest aspects of our identity. But this kind of holistic thinking is completely incompatible with individualism and has been therefore been banished in the West. Our so-called experts are ignorant, if not outright hostile, to these ideas because they challenge their fundamentally corrupt system, a system that pretends authority is gained through consent, merit, and rational discourse, that presuppose that authority and legitimacy are man made. We live in an arbitrary world that tries to impose its anti traditional tradition, to homogenize local cultures and subject them to an alleged impersonal state that is supposed to be fair and blind to whoever it's dealing with, and that is ever encroaching on the ways we relate to one another, to replace our personal authority for its own artificial systems of legitimacy, which include the way we ought to think about the world. In this channel, I try to explore how, by corrupting our relationship to our source of authority, we get corrupt authorities that pursue corrupting agendas. Modern education tries to brand us and tell us we don't get to continue our old traditions. We don't get to make our own traditions. We don't get to make other traditions our own either. It's just what they want to impose on us. They want to replace those traditions with something better, more progressive, more up to speed with the current trends that they want to impose on society. They say this is the latest fad in science or something like that. But it's always just their ideology imposing itself on your ways of being and believing, basically taking your own kids from you because now it's not legitimate to pass on your traditions to your children, your values to your children. So these self proclaimed rulers of the world aim to tell us what our traditions should be because they consulted each other and came to the right conclusion through debate and reason. We're being robbed of authority and freedom that belongs to us. All of this in an attempt to erase personhood, to deny the fact that authority is a personal phenomenon, because the system it purports to erect wants to present itself as neutral and unbiased, seeing humanity itself as a disease to be transcended and as fundamentally unjust. These utopian technocrats that claim to want fairness, knowingly or not, lie. They will always attempt to undermine our identity at every turn in order to alienate you from yourself and to mold you to their liking. They are waging a spiritual war against us to make it impossible for us to live in a world with stable identities and relationships that aren't ultimately controlled and designed by them. Everything must be fluid for them to be able to dictate the terms, to redefine what humanity is. To them, you're just a lab rat, and they're trying to remake humanity, refashion it in their image, or rather, destroy it. I am an Orthodox Christian, and my faith is the lens through which I see the world. My tradition is what gives me my beliefs about identity and where authority comes from. I believe that we have a human nature, that cultures are related not only in terms of history and shared traits, but also because of a common human nature that links all of us. I believe we were made in the image of God and have the opportunity and responsibility to regain our likeness to Him. This entails how we treat each other, how we should think, and how we should be governed. I believe our authority ultimately comes from Him. I'm also a Western man, and I've had to work very hard to find out what being a Westerner means. And I want to share some of my discoveries with you. A living tradition is impossible without others, without rules, and those rules come from authority. That's why men predominantly gravitate towards identitarian politics as opposed to egalitarianism. That's why men have a stronger tendency to value mastery and clarity over equality and vagueness, and a higher drive to want to grow in competence and responsibility to serve as leaders and teachers. Those desires feel out of place in the West because our cultures have been shaped by egalitarian philosophies that represent a systematic attack on authority and the true embodiment of it. That's partly why white men are the targets of so much hate right now. This channel will try to explore the intellectual and spiritual underpinnings of our current situation and propose some ways forward. So stay tuned for more content. But before I go, I want to address the suggestive title I picked for this channel and for this introduction. If our authority comes from God, this means that whatever we do must be in line with Him, including politics. Orthodox Christianity does not share the same concept of separation of church and state that we see in the secular West. If you live in the Anglosphere, you will hear people talk about Christian nationalism, and some will say it's theocracy. It's really interesting to talk about this, and it will be explored in this channel in the future. But to my mind, there's a prior question to answer. Don't you think it's a little bit ridiculous to expect others to behave and wield their authority in ways that are not in line with who they are, with their identity, their traditions, and worldviews? Who are we to abstract ourselves into the ether and pretend that we don't have a personal perspective on things? Where do we stand to be neutral? As a Christian, what I want is for Christ to be king, for the love of God to infuse everything, including the ways we set standards and rules for ourselves. I want our rulers to be faithful subjects of God, willing to die for God, for their country, and for their people. Shepherds must tend to their flock. To love God and to love others as oneself, to give it all, is an existential commitment that defines the Christian. The gospel is a declaration of victory over death and sin, one that has already happened, is happening, and will happen. It is a revelation of who God is, of the personhood of Christ. So that's what I mean when I declare Him Lord, King of Kings and God. Hopefully, you'll join me in exploring how we used to think about authority, about God and man. His is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.